A ruthless billionaire who built an empire but never built a home. A widowed father who gave up everything for his daughter's future. When a violent storm grounds every flight out of the city, fate shoves them into the last available room. Two strangers with nothing in common except the loneliness they've both been running from. What happens next, neither of them planned. And what they almost walk away from will cost them everything. Drop your city in the comments and hit that like button. Let's see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The terminal was loud in the way airports always get loud when things start falling apart. Not the ordinary noise of departure gates and rolling luggage, but something sharper, strained, the kind of sound a place makes when 3,000 people simultaneously realize that no one is going anywhere. Mason Carter stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Gate B-17 and watched lightning split the sky over Chicago in a way that felt almost personal. It came down in thick, jagged lines, white against a sky that had turned the color of a bruise somewhere around 4 in the afternoon. Rain was hitting the tarmac so hard it was bouncing back up. Two regional jets sat motionless on the runway, their jet bridges retracted, their crews nowhere visible. A third aircraft, a wide-body he'd had a seat on, had already been towed back toward the hangar, which told him everything he needed to know before the gate agent even reached for her microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, due to severe weather conditions and the FAA ground stop currently in effect for O'Hare International. The collective groan from the waiting area rose before she could finish the sentence. Mason didn't groan. He pressed his forehead lightly against the cold glass and closed his eyes. Lily. That was the first thing. Not the delay, not the meeting he'd just wrapped, not the promotion letter sitting in his laptop bag. The signed, official, HR-sealed promotion letter for the Director of Operations position he'd been angling toward for 3 years. His first thought, like it always was his daughter. She was at his sister's place in Naperville. Rachel had her for the week while Mason was in New York for the Hartfield and Monroe Annual Leadership Conference. He told Lily he'd be home Thursday. He told her he'd make her pancakes Friday morning before school. Lily was 8. She tracked promises the way some people track debt. Carefully, without forgetting. He pulled out his phone and called Rachel. Hey! His sister picked up on the second ring, her voice carrying the background noise of a television and what sounded like Lily arguing with someone about screen time. Don't tell me. Grounded, he said. FAA ground stop. I don't know how long. Rachel was quiet for a beat. You want me to tell her? Not yet. Let her finish whatever she's doing. He turned away from the window and looked at the gate. The line at the rebooking desk had already formed. 12, maybe 15 people, all wearing the same look of controlled frustration that business travelers wear when their schedule collapses around them. I'll call her once I know what I'm doing. Is she okay? She's fine. She beat Marcus at Mario Kart twice and she's been insufferable about it. Despite everything, Mason almost smiled. Okay. I'll call you when I know more. He hung up and stood in the middle of the terminal for a moment, watching the crowd organize itself around the disruption. Some people were already on laptops, already rebooking, already adapting with the practiced ease of people who flew every other week. Others were at the windows with their phones raised, filming the lightning. A few stood very still, staring at nothing, recalculating something internally. Mason was 32 years old and had been a single father for 4 of those years. And the thing that nobody told you about that particular life was that it made you very good at recalculating, at looking at a situation that had just blown up and quietly, without drama, figuring out the next step. He walked to the rebooking desk and got in line. Her name was Ava Sterling, and she did not wait in lines. This was not arrogance exactly, or maybe it was, but it had long since calcified into something more like operational habit. When you spent your 20s building a company from a studio apartment in Austin to a 9-figure valuation in less than 6 years, you stopped waiting in lines because waiting in lines costs money, and money had once been the only real thing between her and the life she'd clawed out of nothing. She had a travel coordinator. She had a dedicated rebooking protocol. She had, theoretically, a private aviation option that her assistant Marcus had already texted her about twice in the last 20 minutes. She was currently ignoring all of it. Ava Sterling stood at the far end of Gate B-17 seating area with her shoes off and her feet tucked under her on one of the uncomfortable airport chairs, her phone face down on the seat beside her, and she was staring at the storm like it owed her something. The Hartfield and Monroe conference had ended 3 hours ago. She'd given the keynote, 35 minutes, polished, the kind of speech that made a room go quiet in the way you wanted a room to go quiet. She'd done the handshakes and the photographs and the polite conversations with venture capitalists who wanted to be in a room with her more than they wanted to actually talk to her. She'd smiled through a business dinner that ran 2 hours longer than it was supposed to. And now she was sitting in an airport with her heels off, watching a storm, and feeling not sad exactly. Just empty in the specific way she always felt when the performance was over and there was no next performance immediately scheduled. Her phone lit up. Marcus, again. Private charter is available out of Midway. Wheels up in 90 minutes if we move now. Want me to confirm? She picked up the phone, put it back down. Then she looked at the storm again. Lightning moved across the horizon in a long, slow arc, and for a moment it lit everything up. The runway, the grounded planes, the silver sheets of rain coming in sideways. It was genuinely beautiful in a way that she didn't let herself register very often, because registering that kind of thing during a workday felt like a luxury she hadn't finished earning yet. She was 30 years old. She picked up the phone. Not tonight. Cancel it. Marcus replied in under a minute. You sure? Weather window might close. I said cancel it. She set the phone down again. I'll figure it out. What she did not add was that she was tired of the helicopter exits, tired of the private car and the private flight, and the whole apparatus of her life that moved her from one curated environment to the next, without friction, without surprise, without anything real getting in. Sometimes a storm was just a storm. Sometimes you sat in the airport like everyone else, and you felt the delay, and it reminded you that you were still a person, not just a brand. She was aware this was not a thought she could say out loud to most people in her life without them looking at her like she'd said something dangerously close to a breakdown. She reached into her bag and pulled out the conference program, the printed one, which she always requested and never actually read during the event itself. She turned to the speaker bios, ran through the familiar names, paused on one she didn't recognize. Mason Carter, Director of Strategic Operations, Hartfield and Monroe Midwest Division, recognized for leading the firm's restructuring of its regional logistics framework, resulting in a 22% efficiency gain over 18 months. There'd been a panel that afternoon, one she'd been pulled away from early for a media obligation, about operational innovation. She'd caught maybe 10 minutes of it from the back of the room before her communications director materialized at her elbow. She'd seen a man at the far end of the panel table, younger than the others, talking without notes, which she always noticed. He'd been making a point about the difference between managing systems and building culture, and the room had been paying attention in a way that wasn't just courtesy. She looked at the name again. Mason Carter. She set the program down. The rebooking line moved slowly, which was expected. What Mason hadn't expected was how thoroughly the storm had shut everything down. Not just Chicago, but a corridor reaching from Detroit to St. Louis. A weather system massive enough that half the country's rebooking options were already gone. Next available into LaGuardia would be tomorrow evening, the gate agent told him, with the particular tone of someone who had said this sentence 40 times in the last 2 hours and was going to say it 40 more times before they clocked out. Or I can get you into Newark first thing Saturday morning. LaGuardia tomorrow evening, he said. And hotel options? The agent looked at her screen, then she looked at him. That's the issue, sir. The convention center had a major conference wrapping today. Hartfield and Monroe, I know, I was there. And we've already had 2 other ground stops this week from earlier weather events. Most properties near O'Hare are sold out. I'm seeing availability at... She scrolled. 1 room at the Meridian. That's it for this area. The Meridian's on... what? That's like 45 minutes from here. In normal traffic. Tonight, with the storm... She made a gesture that completed the sentence for her. Book it, he said. Please. He moved to the side to let the next person up and checked his phone while the confirmation came through. 1 room. King suite, apparently. Only thing they had. He'd slept in worse situations. Once, during a particularly bad stretch about 2 years after Sophie died, he'd fallen asleep in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner because Lily had finally crashed out in her car seat at 2 in the morning and he'd been afraid to move her. One expensive hotel room was not a problem. He was flagging a rideshare when he nearly walked directly into someone. Sorry. He caught himself, looked up. The woman standing in front of him was looking at her phone, not at him. She was wearing a dark blazer over a silk shirt, heels in her left hand, carrying a bag that probably cost more than Mason's car payment. She was also, objectively, the most put-together person he'd seen in the terminal all afternoon, which was saying something given the general deterioration of everyone's composure over the last hour. My fault, she said, still looking at her phone. No, I wasn't watching. Neither was I. She looked up then. Brown eyes, direct, slightly impatient in the way that some people just looked impatient as a baseline. Did you just come from rebooking? Yeah. How bad is it? Tomorrow evening, at the earliest into New York. Most hotels are sold out within 20 miles. Something shifted in her expression, so not alarm, but a kind of recalibration. Most. There's one room at a place called the Meridian. I just booked it. She looked at him for a beat. Then she pulled her own phone up and started moving her thumbs. He watched her face as she searched, watched the particular expression of someone who was used to problems resolving themselves through sheer force of resources, confronting a problem that wasn't going to do that. Meridian's showing sold out, she said. I know, I took the last one. She lowered her phone, looked at him with an expression that was almost, not quite, but almost amused. Well, that's unfortunate. I'm Mason Carter. He didn't know why he offered it. Force of habit, maybe. She held out her hand. Ava Sterling. He shook it. It took him a second, not because he didn't know the name, but because of the gap between the name and the person standing in front of him with her shoes in her hand in the middle of a delayed terminal. You spoke this morning. I caught part of your keynote. You were at the conference? Panel on Operational Frameworks, end of the afternoon. She tilted her head slightly, and something in the mild assessment in her eyes sharpened. I missed most of that panel. It was good, he said. Your keynote was better. She didn't smile exactly, but the slight tension around her mouth relaxed. Thank you. A pause. So, you have the last hotel room in Chicago. Looks like it. She glanced at the storm, then back at him with the look of someone who was about to propose something that she had already internally decided was reasonable and was calculating how to frame it so the other person would arrive at the same conclusion. Have you thought about splitting it? He said. It's a suite. There's a living area. I noticed that too. He considered her. She was watching him with the careful, neutral attention of someone accustomed to sizing up rooms full of people and had applied that same skill to him. He didn't feel inspected by it, just looked at, which was different. King bed living area with a pullout from what the agent described. I'd need the living area. I'd need the bed, she said. That seems fine. You don't know me. You're Mason Carter, Director of Strategic Operations at Hartfield and Monroe. You just came from the same conference I did, and you have a rebooking confirmation on your phone that I can verify against the hotel booking, she said. I've made larger business decisions on less information. He almost laughed at that. Almost. Fair enough. Kissed. The Meridian turned out to be 40 minutes away in weather that had gone from severe to genuinely alarming by the time their rideshare crept onto the expressway. Rain was sheeting across the windshield in waves, the wipers going at full speed and barely keeping up. Somewhere to the north, a flash of lightning turned the sky white for 2 full seconds. Their driver, a man named Gerald, who had been doing this long enough to be calm about everything, had the classical radio station on low. Neither of them spoke much for the first 20 minutes. Mason texted Rachel, then called Lily. Daddy? Lily's voice came through the phone with the particular clarity that made him feel the distance acutely. Aunt Rachel said there's a storm. Big one, he confirmed. I'm stuck in Chicago tonight, Bug. I'll be home tomorrow, okay? A pause that he knew well, the kind she did when she was deciding how to feel about something. Tomorrow for sure? Tomorrow for sure. Friday morning pancakes, I promise. I'm just moving them one day. Saturday pancakes? Saturday pancakes. Another pause. Okay. Then with an abrupt shift that was pure Lily, I beat Marcus at Mario Kart. I heard, twice, 3 times. Aunt Rachel doesn't know about the 3rd time. He laughed for the first time in several hours. Go easy on the man. He's 40. That's why he's slow. Good night, Lily. Night, Daddy. He hung up and sat back against the seat. The car moved through the rain. After a moment, he became aware that Ava Sterling, sitting on the other side of the back seat, was looking out her own window, not at him, but the particular quality of her stillness suggested she'd been listening in the careful, unobtrusive way of someone trying not to appear to listen. He didn't say anything about it. He put his phone in his pocket and watched Chicago slide past in the rain. Shuts. The Meridian was the kind of hotel that had been upscale in 1997 and had sustained itself since on a combination of decent renovations and consistent breakfast service. The lobby had dark wood paneling, a chandelier that was doing its best, and a front desk staff that looked like they'd had a very long week. Carter, the clerk confirmed, typing with focused energy. King Suite? Yes, you're our last room. She said it the way you'd say something that was both a relief and a cautionary tale. She slid 2 key cards across the desk and then looked at Ava. And, are you with Mr. Carter? Ava looked at Mason. Mason looked at Ava. Yes, Mason said, which was technically true in the same way that 2 people sharing an elevator were with each other. The suite was on the 8th floor, a room that was larger than his apartment had been when he first moved to Chicago, with windows that faced the skyline and were currently being hammered by rain that sounded like applause. There was a king bed on one side, separated from the main living area by a short entryway, and a living area with a couch that folded out, and a desk and a minibar, and a coffee table with a bowl of slightly wilted complimentary fruit. I'll take the pull-out, Mason said, setting his bag near the couch. I already said the bed. You did. I'm confirming. She set her bag down near the closet and turned around. In the controlled light of the hotel suite, out of the terminal and the rain and the context of 300 other conference attendees, she looked less like the person in the bio photos, still composed, still that quality of attention he'd noticed in the terminal, but also tired in the specific way that people get when they've been performing a version of themselves for too long and the performance has worn grooves into them. Are you hungry? She asked. I haven't eaten since noon. Room service menus on the table. She sat on the edge of the bed without ceremony and picked up the menu. He sat at the desk and pulled his laptop out, intending to check email. He stared at the screen for a moment and then looked over at her, where she was reading the menu with the focused attention of someone who had not possibly read something as unstressful as a menu in a while. What are you getting? He asked. The burger, she said, without hesitation. Billionaire, CEO, keynote speaker, and you're getting the burger. She looked up at him. What were you going to get? The burger. She held his gaze for a beat. Something shifted in her expression. Not the recalibration from the terminal, but something smaller, quieter. Almost like the beginnings of a real smile, the kind that wasn't curated for anyone's benefit. 2 burgers, she said. He called room service. The food arrived in 35 minutes, and by then the storm had intensified to something that made the room feel genuinely insulated. The rain against the glass, a constant white noise, the occasional grumble of thunder making the windows vibrate faintly. They ate at the small table near the window, which felt strange for about 3 minutes, and then didn't. Mason ate quickly, the way he'd learned to eat from years of meals where Lily might need something in the middle of it. Ava ate more slowly, with the particular attention of someone who didn't eat for the experience very often. How long have you been at Hartfield and Monroe? She asked. 7 years? Director title is actually, it's new. Official as of this week. She looked up. You just got promoted? Signed the letter yesterday morning. And then a storm grounded you. And then a storm grounded me. She considered this. That seems about right for how things work. Pretty much. He pushed a fry around his plate. You build up to something for 3 years, you finally get there, and the universe immediately redirects you. I have a daughter. It keeps me humble. She asked it before she'd clearly decided whether to ask it. How old? 8, Lily. He paused just slightly, the way he always did when he said her name to someone new. That brief internal check that it was okay to let someone into that part of his life, even peripherally. She's with my sister this week. You mentioned her on the phone. He nodded. Didn't make anything of it. She sounds... Ava stopped. Started again. She sounds like she owns you completely. He looked at her. She does, in the best possible way. There was something in Ava's face when he said it, a micro expression, quick and unguarded, there and gone. Not envy exactly. Something more complicated. What about you? He asked. Where are you based? Austin officially. New York half the time. Wherever the fire is, the other half. She picked up her glass of water. No kids. No? Anything. Just the company. That's not nothing. No, she agreed. It's not nothing. But the way she said it suggested she was familiar with the specific texture of that particular nothing. They talked for a long time. This was the thing that Mason would remember later, not as a dramatic turning point, but as something that surprised him with its naturalness. He was not a man who opened up easily. 4 years of managing everything alone, the grief, the finances, the parenting, the career climb, had made him good at being self-contained in social situations. He deflected questions about his personal life with practiced ease. He answered work questions. He asked follow-ups. He was known, among colleagues and the few friends he'd maintained since Sophie died, as someone who was warm but impenetrable. He sat in a hotel room with a stranger through the length of a November storm and talked like he hadn't talked in years. Some of it was circumstance, the sealed feeling of the room, the rain, the remove from everything ordinary. Some of it, he would think later, was simply her. Ava Sterling was good at listening in a way that wasn't passive. She asked questions that weren't small talk, and she answered his when he asked with a directness that he hadn't expected from someone whose public persona was all polished surfaces. He told her about the years before the promotion, the period after his wife died when he'd been working reduced hours to manage Lily's care schedule and had watched colleagues pass him without having the bandwidth to compete. He told her about building it back slowly, about the specific indignity of explaining in professional settings that he had a child to pick up at a certain time, and the way some people heard that as a limitation rather than just a fact. They never say anything, he said. It's not overt. You just notice who stops including you in the after-work conversations, who stops passing the informal stuff your way, because you're the one who has to be somewhere at 6. Women deal with that constantly, she said. The assumption that having a family means you've deprioritized the work. I know I didn't fully understand that before. He paused. I understand it better now. She was sitting with her knees pulled up slightly, the composed posture from earlier gone without his noticing when it had gone. She looked, not younger exactly, but less defended. When did you lose your wife? He didn't flinch at the question. He'd had 4 years to practice. Lily was 4, aneurysm. Sophie was perfectly healthy as far as anyone knew, and then she wasn't. He said it evenly. The evenness had taken a long time to arrive. There was no warning, which people seem to find more disturbing somehow than if there'd been a long illness, like they want there to have been time to prepare. There's no version of that where you're prepared, Ava said quietly. No. He looked at the window, rain moving in long rivulets down the glass. No, there isn't. Sorry. Thank you. He meant it the way he always tried to mean it, not as a social reflex, but as a real receipt of the acknowledgement. What about you? You built the company from... He'd done the mental math from things he'd half heard during the conference. You started it at what, 23? 22? She said it without pride. Or rather, with the kind of pride that had been in service of something else for so long, it had become inseparable from obligation. I had a very specific thing I needed to prove, to a father who told me the idea was stupid, to an industry that thought I was decoration, to myself mostly. She paused. When you spend that long proving something, you forget to check in on whether you still want the thing you were fighting for. Do you? She looked at him. Some of it. A pause. The work itself, yes. I'm good at it, and it matters. The rest of it... She moved one hand in a small gesture that was the most unpolished thing he'd seen her do. The parties and the profiles and the being a symbol of something that I could do without. So do without it. She gave him a look. It's not that simple. I know. I'm not saying it is. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. I'm saying there's a difference between the things you've built and the things that attach to them. You built a company. You didn't necessarily sign up for the whole performance around it. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, thunder moved through the sky slowly, like something enormous turning over in its sleep. No one said that to me out loud before, she said finally. It's obvious. Obvious to you. Most people don't. She stopped, restarted. Most people I talk to want something from me, or they're performing for me, or they're nervous, or they're already thinking about how this conversation looks from the outside. She looked at him with that direct assessment. You're not doing any of those things. I'm tired, and I just want to get home to my kid, he said. I don't have energy for performance. Something happened in her face at that. A small, genuine thing, visible only because the hour was late and the lights were low, and neither of them was performing. A kind of recognition, like she'd been waiting to hear that something was real and had almost stopped expecting it. They talked until nearly 2 a.m. About Lily, her personality, her stubbornness, the way she'd started asking harder questions in the last year that Mason wasn't always sure he was answering well. About Sophie a little, enough that Ava understood the shape of it without him cataloging it. About Ava's company, not the version from the keynote, but the operational reality of it, the decisions that had cost her, the hires she'd gotten wrong, the year she'd almost burned out so completely she'd had to take 3 weeks in a rental house in Vermont and tell everyone she was at a conference. Were you just alone? In Vermont? With a lot of books I didn't end up reading. She almost smiled. I slept a lot. I walked. I cooked badly. It was the best 3 weeks I'd had in years. And then you went back. And then I went back. She paused. Because the company needed me. And there was nobody else who could make the decisions that needed to be made. A longer pause. And also because I didn't know what I would do if I stopped. He understood that more than he let on. The forward motion of necessity. The way you could use responsibility as both purpose and insulation. He'd done it too, in the years after Sophie. Work and Lily, and work and Lily. Because the alternative was stillness, and stillness let things in. What would you do, he asked, if you stopped? She looked at him for a long moment. Genuinely considering it, he could tell. Not performing consideration, but actually sitting with the question. I don't know, she said. That's probably the problem. Around 2:30, she went to the bathroom to change and came out in a hotel robe looking approximately 11 years younger, which was not a relevant observation and which Mason filed away in the part of his brain that was registered as not your business, Carter. You should sleep, he said. He was already pulling the cushions off the couch. I'm not tired. You have to be. I know. She sat on the edge of the bed, tucked one foot under her, looked out at the rain which had softened from its earlier rage into something steadier, persistent. Do you do this? Just talk to people? Like this? He considered the question seriously. No, me neither. What do you think that means? She turned and looked at him. In the low light of the room, with the storm pressing against the glass, she looked like a person rather than an image. Tired, real, carrying something he couldn't quite name but recognized the shape of. I think it means the storm was good timing, she said. He held her gaze for a moment, an honest, uncomplicated moment, and then pulled the couch cushion flat and sat on it to check the pull-out mechanism. Get some sleep, Ava. She was quiet. Then, you too, Mason. He wrestled with the pull-out for 3 minutes before conceding that the mechanism was broken and that he was going to sleep on the couch cushions on the floor, which was fine. He'd slept worse. He turned off the lamp on the desk and lay down in the dark and listened to the rain. From the bed, after a few minutes, he heard her breathing slow and even out. He lay there and thought about his daughter, about the pancakes they'd have on Saturday, about the promotion letter in his bag and what it meant, and what it was going to cost in hours and new pressures. He thought about the conversation they'd just had, the length of it, the ease of it, the strange, unhidden quality of it that he couldn't quite account for. He did not think about Ava Sterling in any way that was anything other than what it was. Two people in a storm, in a room that wasn't theirs, telling each other the truth because the circumstances had stripped away every reason not to. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, in the particular silence that follows a long conversation when both people have finally run out of words to say, Mason Carter closed his eyes. He was home by tomorrow evening, he told himself, pancakes on Saturday. He was fine. He had no idea that fine was not the word for what was coming. Mason woke up before 6 with the specific disorientation of someone who had fallen asleep somewhere unfamiliar and needed a few seconds to locate themselves in the world. The couch cushions had shifted in the night, and he was half on carpet, his laptop bag serving as a pillow, the conference program folded under his left shoulder. His back was going to have opinions about this later. The storm had stopped. He lay still for a moment and registered the quiet, the particular absence of the rain that had been so constant for hours that the silence now felt like a presence. Gray early light was coming through the window, flat and cold, the kind of November morning that looked like the sky had run out of ideas. He could see the city from here, wet and still, the office towers catching no light worth mentioning. From the other side of the room, nothing, just the soft, even breathing of someone still asleep. He got up carefully, gathered his jacket from the desk chair, and went into the bathroom to clean up without making noise about it. He looked at himself in the mirror the way he did most mornings. A brief, unsentimental inventory. 32. Tired, but not in a new way. The kind of tired that had become so structural over the last 4 years that he barely noticed it except in moments like this, in unfamiliar mirrors when there was no immediate task requiring his attention. He'd slept maybe 4 hours. He felt more rested than he had in a week. He didn't examine that too closely. When he came back out, Ava was awake, sitting up in the bed with her knees pulled to her chest, hair down and slightly disheveled, looking at nothing in particular with the blank expression of someone who had just surfaced from sleep and hadn't yet decided how to be. She looked up when he came in. "Morning," he said. "Is the storm gone?" "Yeah, stopped sometime while we were sleeping." She looked toward the window. The gray light fell across her face without ceremony. No softening filter. No particular drama. She looked tired. She looked real. She looked nothing like the woman in the conference program bio photo, and exactly like a person who'd slept 4 hours in a hotel bed after talking until 2 in the morning. "Coffee," she said. It was not quite a question. I was about to figure that out. The room had one of those small in-room machines that produced coffee roughly the temperature of a warm opinion. He made 2 cups while she went to the bathroom, and by the time she came back out, robe exchanged for yesterday's clothes, hair pulled back in a way that managed to look intentional despite obviously being improvised, he had both cups on the table by the window. She sat down across from him and wrapped both hands around the cup without drinking it. They both looked out at the city. "My flight's at 7:15 tonight," she said. "Back to New York first, then Austin Wednesday. I'm on LaGuardia tomorrow evening. What will you do today?" He thought about it. "Find somewhere to work. Get dinner somewhere that isn't this hotel. Maybe walk if it warms up." He paused. "What about you?" "I have calls." She said it the way people say I have calls, when what they mean is I always have calls, and I haven't decided yet whether today is a day I want to let that be true. He looked at her. She was looking into her coffee. "You don't have to," he said. "The calls?" "Whatever you're obligating yourself to in your head right now." She glanced up at him with an expression that was sharp enough to be a warning and then softened into something more uncertain. "It's not that simple." "You said that last night." "Because it keeps being true." He nodded, didn't push. Outside, a delivery truck moved through the wet street below them, leaving 2 dark tracks in the standing water. The city was beginning to come back to life in its slow, practical way, indifferent to storms and delays and whatever anyone had told each other in hotel rooms the night before. "What was her name?" Ava asked. She said it carefully, the way people do when they're asking about a topic that's been in the room without being named. "Your wife." "Sophie." He said it without hesitation. "Sophie Renee Carter." She kept her name professionally. She was an architect, so she went by Sophie Renee professionally, which she always thought sounded more serious than Sophie Carter. He almost smiled. She was right. It did. What was she like? He sat back. This was a question he was careful with, not because it was painful, but because he'd learned that people asked it wanting a version of Sophie that resolved cleanly into either tragedy or memory, and Sophie had been neither. She'd been difficult and funny and stubborn about specific things and completely flexible about others, and she'd been a better architect than she ever gave herself credit for, and she'd been a mediocre cook who refused to acknowledge that she was a mediocre cook. And he had loved her the way you love someone you've built a life with. Not perfectly, but with the full weight of your actual self. Opinionated, he said, particularly about buildings. She couldn't walk past a building she thought was poorly designed without saying something about it. We'd be late to things because she'd stopped to look at a facade and needed to explain to me specifically what the architect had gotten wrong. He paused. I know more about post-tension concrete than any non-architect should. Ava laughed. A real one, quick and unguarded. That's specific. She was specific. He looked down at his coffee. Lily has her stubbornness. And her thing about needing to finish a thought before she can move on. You can't interrupt Lily mid-sentence. Sophie was the same way. I noticed it in Lily around age 5, and it knocked me sideways for about a week. Ava was quiet, watching him with that particular quality of attention he'd noticed last night, the kind that didn't perform itself. Do you talk about her? To Lily, I mean. Yes. Intentionally. He'd thought hard about this, consulted a therapist for a year after Sophie died, read more books about childhood grief than he'd ever intended to read. There are parents who don't because they think it protects the kid. I didn't want Lily to grow up with a blank where her mother was supposed to be. So we talk about her. Sophie's still in the apartment. Photos. A couple of her drawings framed in the hallway. Lily knows stories. That seems right, Ava said. It seems like the right thing. I think so. I'm not sure with parenting. You do the best thinking you can do and then you live with what it produces. He met her eyes. You don't know if you got it right until later. She held his gaze for a moment. I think that might be true about more than parenting. He picked up his coffee. Probably. They sat with that for a moment, the comfortable, unresolved weight of it, and outside the November morning went on being gray and quiet and ordinary. Tell me about your father, he said. It wasn't a demand, just the natural pull of the thread from the night before, when she'd mentioned him in passing. She looked down at her hands around the cup. Her jaw tightened slightly. A small, involuntary thing. What do you want to know? Whatever you're comfortable with. She was quiet long enough that he thought she might redirect. Then, he's not a bad man. I want to be clear about that before I say anything else, because people hear, my father said my idea was stupid, and they want him to be a villain, and he isn't. She paused. He had a very clear idea of what a good life for me looked like. Stable job, practical degree, stay close to home. He came from nothing, and he built enough to feel secure, and he wanted that security for me more than he wanted anything else. But I didn't want security. I wanted to build something. She turned the cup slowly in her hands. When I told him about the company, I was 21, still in school. I had the idea, and I had $1,200 in a savings account, and I had an outline in a notebook. He told me I was going to waste my education chasing something that wouldn't work, that I should finish my degree and get a real job and maybe try the entrepreneur thing later if I still wanted to. She looked up. He said later like it was a consolation prize. And you didn't wait. I couldn't wait. I had this thing inside me that felt like it was going to burn a hole through me if I didn't act on it. She said it with a kind of pragmatic honesty rather than drama. So I left school in my junior year and I started the company. My father didn't speak to me for 8 months. Mason was quiet. He came around, she said. Eventually. Once the money was real enough that it wasn't abstract anymore. Once there was coverage and a staff and an office, then he could point to it and call it a success. And he does. He tells people about the company at family dinners. A pause. We just never talked about the 8 months. Did you want to? She looked at him with an expression that was complex in a way she didn't try to simplify. I wanted him to say that he was wrong about me, not about the business, about me, that I was capable of knowing what I needed. She paused. He never said that. He said he was proud of me, which is close, but it's not the same thing. No, Mason said. It's not. I know it sounds small. It doesn't. He said it directly, without softening it into encouragement. It sounds like something that should have been said and wasn't, and you carried it into the company, into the work. She looked at him with slightly widened eyes. Not hurt, but something like the specific expression of someone who has had an accurate thing said to them, without preparation. I think that's right, she said. The 8 months probably cost him too, Mason said. He just never learned how to say that either. She looked away, toward the window. He watched the city move through her eyes. The slight softening of something that had been held tightly for a long time, not released but shifted slightly. He has a granddaughter now, she said. My brother's kid, Amara. She's 3. A small pause. When I go home for things, holidays, birthdays, he has Amara on his knee the whole time. He's completely different with her than he ever was with me. Patient, soft. He does voices for the picture books. That must be complicated to watch. I told my therapist it made me angry, and she told me that was a completely rational response, she said dryly. So at least I come by it honestly. He laughed at that. A real one. She smiled, and this time it wasn't a micro-expression. It was a full thing, reaching her eyes, changing the whole geography of her face. You're better at this than you think, he said. At what? Talking, being honest about things. He turned his cup on the table. You said last night that nobody asks you real questions, but I think the other side of that is that you don't usually let anyone get close enough. She considered him. That's a pretty direct thing to say to someone you met 12 hours ago. You said it first, more or less. A pause. I did, didn't I? Outside, a siren moved through the city and faded. Somewhere in the hotel, a door opened and closed. The ordinary sounds of a morning rebuilding itself. I keep thinking, she said slowly, about what you said last night. About the difference between the things you've built and the things that attach to them. She paused. I've been running the company for 8 years, and for 8 years I've been treating the performance of success like it was the same thing as success, like the profile and the keynotes and the coverage were load-bearing. She looked at him. They're not load-bearing. No. The company doesn't need me to be a symbol. It needs me to be good at my job. A pause. Those are different jobs. They are, he said. She was quiet for a moment. I don't know what I do with that. You don't have to do anything with it today. Easy for you to say. I have my own version of it, he said. The promotion I just got is going to change what my days look like. More hours, more pressure, more things that can go wrong under my name. And part of me has been so focused on getting it that I haven't finished thinking about what it means. He paused. Whether it's the right call for me and Lily at this stage. Is it? He was honest about it. I don't know yet. I think so. The salary difference is substantial enough that it changes what I can offer her. Better school options, more stability cushion. That matters to me more than the title. He paused. But there's going to be a period where I'm adjusting, where I'm stretched thin, and Lily will feel that even if I don't talk about it, she's perceptive. She notices when I'm carrying something. You worry about that. I worry about everything that has to do with her. That's baseline. He said it without apology. She lost her mother at 4. She needs to know that her father is present and that her world is stable. Everything I do professionally is filtered through that. Ava looked at him for a long moment. He couldn't read the full content of her expression. It was layered in a way that suggested several things were happening at once, some of them possibly things she didn't have language for yet. You love her so much, it's almost hard to look at, she said quietly. He felt that land somewhere specific. She's the best thing I've done, he said simply. Everything else is secondary. Ava nodded once, looked back out the window. I used to think I didn't want kids, she said, When I was in my mid-20s and the company was growing and everything was in motion, I was very clear about it. No room, wrong time, wrong life. I was almost righteous about it, like I'd made this efficient decision to not want something that would complicate my trajectory. And now? A pause that was longer than the others. Now I'm 30, and I think maybe I was lying to myself. Or not lying, preemptively protecting myself from wanting something I couldn't see how to have. She said it carefully, like she was testing the shape of the thought as it came out. Because the honest answer is that I don't know how to build that alongside what I've built. And it's easier to say you don't want the thing you can't figure out how to get than to sit with not knowing. That is a very honest thing to say. You have that effect on people, apparently. Just you, he said. Most people are not this honest with me. She turned to look at him with an expression that was, for just a moment, completely undefended. Why do you think that is? He thought about it. I think because I don't need anything from you. And you can feel that. He paused. Most people in your orbit want something. Proximity, access, association, whatever. I have no use for your company, your money, your connections. I just want to get home to my daughter. He met her eyes. That makes me either useless to you or very safe, and I think maybe they're the same thing in your life. She held his gaze for a long beat. Yes, she said. That's exactly what it is. They sat with that for a moment. The strange, rare quality of having named a thing accurately and both knowing it. Then her phone buzzed against the table. She looked at it. Her face shifted back into something more organized, more controlled. Not fake exactly, but layered again, the way you put on armor you've worn so long you do it without thinking. Marcus, she said, I need to take this. Go ahead. She answered it and moved toward the window, and Mason finished his coffee and started gathering his things. He checked his own phone. A text from Rachel saying Lily had slept fine. A flight notification confirming his rebook for tomorrow evening. An email from his new direct supervisor at Hartfield and Monroe with the subject line, "Welcome to the director table," that he'd answer properly once he was somewhere quieter. He could hear fragments of Ava's call. Something about a meeting being rescheduled. Something about an investor in Seattle. Her voice taking on the particular register of someone who has shifted into a different mode, brisk and certain and fully competent in a way that was its own kind of impressive. This was who she was at work. He'd seen the personal version long enough now that the contrast was visible. He wrote his number on the hotel notepad and left it on the table. He wasn't sure why. It felt presumptuous, and it also felt like the right thing to do, and he stood there for a moment weighing both of those things, and then decided that the night had been real enough to deserve acknowledgement. He picked up his bag. Ava was still on the phone, her back to the room, one hand pressed flat against the window glass as she talked. She didn't turn around when he opened the door. Ava, he said. She turned, still on the phone, one finger raised, 1 second, and then she looked at him and her expression did something complicated in the space between one breath and the next. Not desperation, not anything dramatic, just recognition. The same look she'd had the night before when he'd said something accurate. He lifted a hand. A simple thing. She lifted hers back. He walked out. In the elevator down to the lobby, he stood with his bag and his conference documents and his promotion letter, and he thought about the drive home tomorrow. He thought about Lily. He thought about pancakes and whether he had maple syrup, or if he needed to stop at the store. He thought about the calls he needed to make, and the work that was waiting, and the new title that was going to change the shape of his days. He thought about a woman standing at a window in a hotel robe at 6 in the morning, telling him something true about herself in a voice that made it clear she wasn't used to doing that. He stepped out into the lobby, into the quiet of the morning after, and did what he always did. He moved forward. One foot, then the other. He told himself the storm was over. He told himself that was the end of it. He was wrong. And somewhere in the part of him that had been paying attention all night, he already knew it. He made the pancakes on Saturday. Lily ate 3 of them with the focused satisfaction of someone who had been promised a thing and was now collecting on it. Syrup distributed in a pattern that followed its own internal logic, a glass of orange juice going warm beside her plate. Mason stood at the counter with his coffee and watched her and felt the particular quality of relief that came from being home. Not happiness exactly, but the resettling of weight onto familiar ground. Was Chicago cold? Lily asked, without looking up from her plate. Very. Did you see snow? Rain, a lot of it. She considered this. Rain's boring. It was not boring rain, he said. It was the kind of rain that shuts down airports. She looked up at that, curious in the precise way she always got when a story had structural interest. It shut down the whole airport? Every flight. Nobody going anywhere. Where did you sleep? Hotel. One of the last rooms in the city. She went back to her pancakes. That's kind of like a movie, she said. Kind of, he agreed. He did not tell her about Ava. There was nothing to tell, technically. It had been one night, one conversation, two strangers in a storm. Telling Lily about it would have required explaining what it was, and he didn't have language for that yet. He wasn't sure the language existed. He refilled his coffee and checked his phone. Nothing from an unknown number. He hadn't expected anything. He'd left his number on a notepad in a hotel room and walked out. And that was the kind of gesture that meant different things depending on who was receiving it. He had no way of knowing which kind it had been. He put his phone in his pocket and ate the last pancake standing at the counter. Monday arrived with the full weight of a new title. His office was technically the same desk. The promotion didn't come with a relocation, just an expansion of scope and a new nameplate that someone from facilities had left propped against his monitor with a post-it note saying "Congrats" in handwriting that tilted severely to the right. His team was the same. His calendar was not. The first week as director of operations was a consecutive wall of meetings, strategy reviews, budget alignment sessions, a full-day orientation with HR that covered everything from liability exposure to performance management protocols, and required him to sign 17 separate documents. He came home both nights after 8. Rachel had Lily on Monday. On Tuesday, Lily was asleep when he got in, and he stood in her doorway for a moment in the dark, just checking the fact of her. The small lump of her under the covers, one arm thrown out toward the edge of the bed. He went to bed at 11 and stared at the ceiling for 40 minutes before his body finally surrendered. The note with his number was still in the hotel. He knew this the way you know something that doesn't require confirmation, definitively and without drama. He'd let it go. Some things were exactly what they appeared to be. A real conversation in a sealed-off moment that didn't carry obligation beyond itself. He'd had something genuine with a stranger in a storm. That was enough. That could be enough. His phone buzzed at 10:43 on Wednesday night. He was at the kitchen table with a draft budget spreadsheet open on his laptop and a half-eaten bowl of cereal beside it, which was what dinner looked like on days when everything else had taken all available time. The buzz came from a number he didn't have saved, a New York area code. I found the notepad in my bag. I don't know how it got there. He looked at this for a moment. Then he typed, "I left it on the table when I walked out." A pause. Then, "I know. I'm saying I don't know how it got from the table into my bag." He sat back. Read it again. There was a quality to the message, dry, slightly formal in structure, but with something underneath it that was the opposite of formal. He could hear her voice in it. "How are the calls?" he typed. "Relentless." "How's the promotion?" "Relentless." Another pause, then, "How's Lily?" He looked at the question for a moment. It was such a small thing, 4 words, but she'd remembered her name without being reminded, and she'd asked about her first, before the promotion, before anything professional, and something about that landed differently than he expected it to. "She beat me at Mario Kart tonight," he typed. First time. She was insufferable about it. "That tracks," Ava sent back, "based on everything you've told me." He smiled at that. Alone at his kitchen table at 10:43 on a Wednesday with a budget spreadsheet open and cereal going soft in the bowl, he smiled like an idiot at his phone. "Get some sleep," he sent. "You're probably in 4 time zones tomorrow." 3. "Good night, Mason." "Good night." He closed the spreadsheet. He didn't reopen it. That was the first text. It was not the last. They fell into something that neither of them named or negotiated. A loose, irregular exchange that started as check-ins and became, gradually, something Mason looked forward to in a way that made him uncomfortable when he noticed it. She texted when she landed somewhere new. He texted when Lily did something that would have been funny to anyone who knew the kid even slightly. She sent him a photo once of a building facade in Seattle with the caption, "I passed this and thought of Sophie," and he'd had to set his phone down for a minute before he could respond because it was such a precise and careful thing to do, to carry that story she'd been told and apply it correctly. He texted back, "She would have hated the windows. Too much reflective glass." Ava. That's exactly what I thought. He didn't know if that was true or if she was being kind, and he found he didn't care which. 3 weeks went by. The texts continued. Neither of them called. There was something about the distance of text that felt right for whatever this was, a form of contact that acknowledged itself without demanding definition. Then his operations director, Priya, dropped a file on his desk one Friday afternoon with the expression of someone delivering news they found interesting and were being professional about. "Sterling Dynamics," she said. "They just announced a partial relocation of their Midwest operations to Chicago, looking to set up a regional innovation center. The commercial real estate filings came out this morning." Mason looked at the file. Sterling Dynamics was Ava's company. He knew this the way everyone in the business world knew it. It was one of the most covered private company moves in a year that had had no shortage of covered moves. "Why Chicago?" Priya asked. She didn't mean anything by it. It was a genuine industry question. Austin was Sterling Dynamics' base. New York was its media center. Chicago was not an obvious choice. "Market positioning, probably," Mason said. "Midwest tech sector is growing. Lower overhead than New York." He said it evenly, with the tone of someone who was analyzing a business decision. He closed the file and did not look at it again until Priya left the office. Then he picked up his phone. "Chicago?" he typed. Her response came back in under 2 minutes. "The Midwest tech sector is growing, lower overhead than New York." He stared at this. "That's word for word what I just told my colleague. It's also true." Ava. A longer pause this time, long enough that he set the phone down and then picked it back up again. When her message arrived, it was different in tone from the dry deflections. More deliberate, like she'd typed and deleted something before arriving at this. "I have real business reasons for the Chicago office. I want to be honest about that. It's not a fiction I invented. But I'd be lying to you if I said you weren't part of the calculation. And I told myself a long time ago that I wasn't going to lie to people about the things that matter." He sat with this for a full minute. Then he typed, "I appreciate that. I also don't know what to do with it. You don't have to do anything with it right now. That's what I said to you in the hotel." "I know," she sent back. "It's good advice. I thought I'd return it." He put his phone in his desk drawer and went back to the budget report he'd been halfway through when Priya came in. He managed 40 minutes of genuine productivity before he retrieved the phone and reread the exchange twice, which told him something about himself that he wasn't fully prepared to acknowledge. That evening, he put Lily to bed early. She had a project due Monday that they'd spent 2 hours on, construction paper and markers, and the kind of focused mess that happened when an 8-year-old was invested in something. And he sat on the living room couch in the quiet apartment with the lights low and thought about what he actually wanted. This was not something Mason Carter did often. Wanting things for himself, outside of Lily's well-being, outside of professional goals that were attached to Lily's well-being, had been a category he'd quietly closed after Sophie died. Not deliberately, not as a decision he'd made and stood by. It had just happened, the way things close when you stop using them and don't notice until you try to open them again. He thought about the hotel room and the storm. He thought about 6 in the morning and gray light and 2 bad cups of coffee. He thought about a woman telling him something true about her father in a voice that was careful and undefended and very tired. He thought about Lily. That was always the pivot point. Whatever he wanted, there was Lily. She had already lost one person. He had made himself a promise 4 years ago, standing in a hospital hallway with a 4-year-old asleep in a chair beside him, that he would not bring instability into her world, that he would not introduce someone into her life who might not stay, that he would not let his own loneliness, which was real and which he was honest with himself about, translate into a risk for his daughter. He hadn't dated in 4 years. He'd been asked out twice and deflected both times with a practiced ease that was its own kind of loneliness. His therapist, he'd stopped going 2 years ago, once things leveled out, though sometimes he thought he should go back, had told him at one point that protecting Lily was real and right, and also, occasionally, a thing he used to protect himself. He hadn't disagreed. He sat with all of it for a long time. Then he got up, washed the markers off the kitchen table, checked on Lily once more, and went to bed. He did not text Ava that night, but he thought about it, which was its own kind of answer. The Sterling Dynamics announcement produced a wave of coverage that lasted 2 weeks. Financial media, business press, the Chicago Tribune running a piece about what the Regional Innovation Center would mean for the local tech ecosystem. Ava gave one interview. Mason watched the clip online without fully deciding to, where she talked about Chicago's talent infrastructure and market access and the long-term strategic positioning of the company. She was good in interviews, precise, controlled. She answered exactly what was asked and nothing beyond it, and you could watch people trying to find angles that weren't there. Mason watched a journalist ask, with barely concealed sharpness, whether the relocation had anything to do with her personal life, and he watched Ava's expression go completely still for exactly 1 second before she said mildly, "I make business decisions for business reasons. I've been doing it long enough to know the difference." It was a clean answer. It was also not fully true, and he was possibly the only person watching who knew that. He texted her that night. "You're good under pressure," she replied, 8 years of practice. "Did you watch the Tribune interview?" "Yes." "What did you think?" He considered this. "I think you answered what you wanted to answer." A pause, then, "You would." She was in Chicago for the first site visit in early December. She texted him the day before. "I'll be in your city tomorrow. No pressure for anything. I just wanted you to know." He appreciated the no pressure. He sat with it for 2 days. She arrived. She spent the day in meetings with real estate brokers and city development contacts and her own team, and he went about his workday at Hartfield and Monroe and helped Lily with homework in the evening and told himself nothing was being decided right now. She texted at 8:30 that night. "Chicago is cold. It's December," he replied. "Austin doesn't do this. You relocated here. I'm beginning to question that decision." He smiled, typed and deleted 2 responses. Then, "Are you free for coffee tomorrow morning?" The pause before her response was short enough that he understood she'd been waiting for it. Yes. They met at a place on Michigan Avenue that Mason had been to twice. Good coffee, not precious about it. The kind of spot that got busy at 8 and cleared out by 9:30 as the office crowd dispersed. He got there first and found a table in the back corner, away from the window, because he was aware that Ava Sterling walking into a coffee shop in a city where she'd just made a major business announcement was not going to go unnoticed. She came in at 8:15 in a gray wool coat, no assistant, no handler, just a bag over one shoulder, and the look of someone who had already been up for 3 hours. She saw him immediately and something in her face shifted. The same small thing he'd noticed in the hotel, the specific expression of someone who had been steeled against an experience and found it was not what they'd steeled against. She sat across from him. He pushed the second coffee toward her. "You ordered already," she said. "You drink it black." I remembered. She looked at the coffee and then at him with an expression that was complicated in a way she didn't try to simplify. "Thank you. How was yesterday?" She shed the coat, sat back. "Long. The space they're proposing is good, better than I expected. The development contact here is someone I've worked with before, which helps." She wrapped her hands around the cup. "I've been doing this long enough that I can tell when a city actually wants you versus when they want what you represent. Chicago's a mixed picture. There are people here who genuinely care about building the sector. There are people who want the announcement to land on their desk at budget review time. That's everywhere." "It is," she agreed. "It's just more visible in a new market." He nodded, looked at her across the small table. In the morning light of a coffee shop in a gray coat and no ceremony, she looked like a real person going about her real life, which she was. He needed to keep holding that thought against the larger image, the interviews, the coverage, the keynote, and remembering that those things were attached to her, but not the whole of her. "How's Lily?" she asked. "She got an A on the project we stayed up late for, came home Monday and told me she knew she'd get it, and she had believed in herself very strongly." Ava laughed. "She sounds exhausting." "She is. She's great." He paused. "She wants a dog. This has become her primary project." "Are you getting a dog?" I'm deflecting every conversation about it with counter-arguments about our apartment lease while internally knowing I'm probably getting a dog. That is extremely transparent. She knows it too. She's just wearing me down methodically. He smiled. She has a long game strategy for this. I found a pros and cons list she made in her notebook. The pros column has 14 items. The cons column has 2 items, and she crossed both of them out. Ava was laughing properly now, the kind that reached her eyes and stayed. 14, including, and I'm quoting directly, a dog would teach me responsibility, which would make me a better person, and that is good for everyone. She's going to run a company someday. She's going to run several, Mason said. He said it with the kind of pride that was quiet and absolute, the pride of someone who has watched something small grow into something that surprises them daily. Then something shifted in his expression, a more serious register, not heavy, but honest. I want to talk to you about something. Ava stilled, not in a fearful way, in the attentive way. I like talking to you, he said. I've liked it since the hotel, the texts, this. I'm aware this has become something, and I'm aware you moved a significant portion of your company's operations, and I'm part of why. He paused. And I want to be honest with you the same way you've been honest with me. So here's the honest thing. I'm not built for casual. I don't have the emotional bandwidth for something that's undefined indefinitely. And I'm not saying that to pressure you into anything. I'm saying it so you understand who you're sitting across from. Ava held his gaze. Her expression was undefended in that particular way, the way that only came when she'd decided to let it be. I know who I'm sitting across from, she said quietly. I've known since the hotel. And Lily. He stopped. This was the part that had no easy frame. She is the variable that changes everything. She is not a complication. She's the center of what my life is. And before anything else becomes anything, she would need to be part of how we think about it. I can't let her form an attachment to someone who might not stay. I've been protecting her from that for 4 years. I understand that. I know you say you understand it. I want you to actually understand it. He leaned forward slightly. She lost her mother. She was 4 years old, and her mother was there one day and not there the next. And she has grown up knowing that people you love can disappear. I have done everything I can to make her feel secure. I will not risk that security for myself. The table was quiet. Around them, the coffee shop went on doing its morning business. The sounds of cups and low conversation, and the door opening to let in a gust of December air. Ava set her cup down. When she spoke, she was careful in the way she was careful when something mattered. I'm not asking you to risk her security. I'm not asking you to do anything on any particular timeline. She paused. What I'm asking, what I've been doing for the last 3 weeks, I suppose, is whether there's a version of this worth taking slowly. Worth figuring out. She met his eyes. I moved operations to Chicago for real business reasons, but I also moved them here because something happened in that hotel room that I haven't been able to walk away from, and I've tried, and I'm not built for pretending otherwise. Mason was quiet. I'm not trying to become a part of Lily's life overnight, she said. I'm not going to show up and try to be something I haven't earned. That's not who I am, and it's not what I want. She picked up her cup. I'm asking for the chance to earn it, however long that takes. He looked at her for a long time. He was looking for the performance, the version of this that was strategic, rehearsed, designed to get a result. He was looking for it the way he looked for it in business negotiations, and it wasn't there. What was there was a woman who had relocated part of her company and driven herself to a coffee shop alone at 8 in the morning and was sitting across from him saying a true thing in a voice that was steady because she'd decided it would be. Okay, he said. She looked at him. Okay. We take it slowly. We figure it out. He held her gaze. But I need you to know going in that if it ever gets to the point where Lily is involved, where she knows you, where she's formed anything, you cannot walk away easily. I need you to know that the stakes change at that point. I know they do. I mean it, Ava. I know you mean it, she said. That's why I'm still sitting here. Outside, December moved through the city in cold gray sheets. Inside, over 2 cups of coffee that had gone slightly cold, something shifted between them. Not dramatically, not with any particular ceremony, but with the specific weight of 2 people who have been honest with each other about hard things and decided to move toward each other anyway. It was not a beginning that looked like a beginning. It was two people with complicated lives and real histories and no guarantee of anything. But it was real. And after everything, after all the performance and the loneliness and the years of forward motion without destination, real was the only thing either of them had ever actually wanted. Taking it slowly turned out to mean something different in practice than it did in theory. In theory, it meant measured steps and no pressure, and a pace that prioritized Lily above everything else. In practice, it meant that Mason and Ava met for coffee twice more in December, once for dinner in the first week of January, and talked on the phone, actually called each other, not just texted, 3 or 4 times a week in the gaps between everything else. It meant that Ava learned the rhythms of his schedule without being told them explicitly, learned that he went quiet on Tuesday evenings because that was when he helped Lily with her weekly reading log, learned that he was more reachable on Saturday mornings before 9 than almost any other time. It meant that Mason learned she had a specific kind of frustration that came out as clipped sentences when she'd been in back-to-back meetings for more than 4 hours, and that the best thing to do was not ask follow-up questions, but just let her talk until it ran out. It meant he learned she ordered the same thing every time at every restaurant unless something on the menu genuinely surprised her, and that she read actual physical books before bed, not her phone, not anything with a screen, because it was the only reliable way she'd found to make her brain stop running. They learned each other in the small, unremarkable ways that people learn each other when they're paying attention. And Mason was paying attention. He noticed when she was tired before she said it. He noticed the particular quality of her silences. There were several different kinds, and they meant different things. He noticed that she asked about Lily in every conversation, consistently and specifically, never as filler, but always as real interest. She remembered details. She asked follow-up questions on things he'd mentioned 2 weeks earlier. It was the kind of attentiveness that you couldn't fake long-term. And Mason was a man who had been looking for the seams in it because that was what protecting Lily required. He didn't find any. The question of Lily remained where he'd placed it, carefully, respectfully, with a weight that Ava never pushed against. She didn't ask to meet her. She didn't angle toward it. When Mason mentioned things Lily had done or said, she responded to the information as information, with genuine warmth and no agenda that he could detect. She was letting him carry that particular door and make the choice about when to open it, and the patience of it, the actual practice patience, from a woman who ran a 9-figure company on decisive action, was its own kind of statement. January became February. The Sterling Dynamics regional office took shape in a building in the West Loop that Ava described, accurately, as having problematic window placement but good bones. She was in Chicago for 4 days out of every 3 weeks. Mason started to learn the pattern of those 4 days the way you learn a weather pattern, not consciously, just through enough repetition that your body starts to anticipate it. He still hadn't told Lily. This was a choice he turned over regularly, examining it from different angles. There was nothing to tell, technically. He and Ava weren't in a defined relationship. They were two people taking something slowly, which was its own kind of evasion, if he was being honest. But Lily asked questions. She was 8 and perceptive, and she'd been watching her father's face her whole life the way children watch parents' faces, for information, for safety cues, for the small tells that said something was happening below the surface. "You've been on the phone a lot," she observed one night in February, with the casual precision of someone who had been noticing for a while. Mason was making dinner, pasta, a weeknight standby, and he kept his eyes on the pot. "Work stuff. The new position comes with more calls." "Not work voice," Lily said. She was sitting at the kitchen island doing homework, pencil tapping against her notebook. "Different voice." He turned around. She was looking at him with Sophie's eyes, that particular directness that had nothing performative in it, just the clear, focused attention of someone who wanted real information. "You sound like your mom when you do that," he said. She absorbed this. "Was it a girl?" He looked at her for a moment. "That's a complicated question." "Is the answer complicated, or is the question?" He turned the burner down and came to sit across from her at the island. "There's a woman I've been talking to, someone I met at a work conference a few months ago." He kept his voice even because Lily was always reading his tone as much as his words. "We're friends. I like talking to her." Lily looked at him steadily. Does she know about me? She does. Did you tell her about Mom? Yes? A pause. Lily went back to her notebook, pencil moving. He watched her write 3 words, stop, erase 1. Okay, she said, which meant she had more thoughts and was deciding how to organize them. He waited. Is she nice? Very. He paused. She's a good person. A real one. Lily nodded slowly. Can I think about it? Yeah, Bug. You can think about it for as long as you want. She went back to her homework. He went back to the pasta. The kitchen was quiet in the specific way it got when Lily was processing something. Not tense, just occupied. She had never been a child who resolved things quickly. She came to conclusions on her own schedule and then held them firmly, and Mason had learned years ago to respect the timeline. That night, after she was in bed, he sat in the living room and texted Ava. I told Lily about you tonight. In general terms. She asked if you were nice. Her response came back after a few minutes. What did you tell her? That you were. She said she needed to think about it. A longer pause. Then, that's completely fair. She's allowed to think about it for as long as she needs. I know. I just wanted you to know it happened. Thank you for telling me. He set the phone down, looked at the framed photo on the bookshelf. Him and Sophie and Lily, taken about 3 months before Sophie died. The 3 of them at a park on an ordinary afternoon that nobody had known to mark as important. Sophie was laughing at something off camera. Lily was looking at Mason. Mason was looking at Sophie. He said, out loud to nobody in particular, I'm trying to do this right. The apartment didn't answer. Outside, February moved across the city. Lily thought about it for 11 days. Then she came home from school on a Tuesday afternoon and dropped her backpack by the door and said, with the decisive finality of someone who had reached a verdict, you can bring her to the pancake place on Saturday if she wants. Mason looked up from his laptop. Yeah? Tell her it's not fancy. She took her shoes off and lined them up against the wall. I don't want her to think it's fancy and then be weird about it. I'll let her know. Also, Lily turned around. She doesn't have to try really hard. I don't like it when people try really hard. She said it with the authority of someone who had formed a strong opinion on a specific topic. It's uncomfortable. I understand that. Okay. She picked up her backpack. Can we have tacos tonight? We can have tacos tonight. She disappeared toward her room. Mason sat very still for a moment and then picked up his phone. Lily has granted a conditional audience, he typed. Pancake place Saturday morning, casual. She says don't try too hard. Ava replied almost immediately. The don't try too hard instruction might be the most terrifying thing anyone's ever said to me. He almost dropped his phone laughing. He texted back, she's 8. She means it sincerely. I know she does. That's why it's terrifying. Just be yourself. What if myself is too much? Then you scale back. But I don't think that's your problem. A pause. Then, Mason. Yeah, I'm nervous. He looked at this for a moment. Ava Sterling, who had testified before a congressional subcommittee, who had negotiated 9-figure contracts, who had sat across from the most aggressive interviewers in financial media and given them nothing they hadn't earned. Nervous about breakfast with an 8-year-old. That's a good sign, he typed back. How is that a good sign? Because it means you understand what's at stake. Well, Saturday arrived with the particular quality that important mornings had. Ordinary on the surface, every small detail slightly too present. Lily wore her favorite sweatshirt, the navy one with the small embroidered star on the sleeve, and said nothing about it being the one she wore on specific occasions, but Mason noticed. He said nothing about noticing. The pancake place was a diner on Belmont that they'd been going to for 2 years. Red vinyl booths, laminated menus, coffee that came without asking and got refilled the same way. The kind of place that had its own gravity. A hostess named Donna, who called Lily Sweet Pea, and always remembered that she liked extra butter. Ava was already there when they arrived. She was in the booth facing the door. Mason registered this. She'd arrived early, which meant she'd been sitting with her nerves for however long, wearing a simple dark sweater, no jewelry except small earrings, hair down, no visible attempt to perform a version of herself. She looked up when they came through the door, and her eyes went immediately to Lily. Lily walked ahead of Mason the way she always did, taking inventory of a space before she committed to it. She slowed as they approached the booth. She looked at Ava with the assessing look that Mason both loved and found occasionally intimidating. Sophie's look, complete and inherited. Ava looked back. She didn't smile too quickly. She didn't do the thing adults often did with children, that slightly too bright performance of enthusiasm that children instinctively distrusted. She just met Lily's eyes and said, "Hi, I'm Ava." "I know," Lily said. She slid into the booth across from her. "Dad told me." "He told me about you too." Lily picked up the menu. "What did he say?" Ava glanced at Mason briefly as he sat down beside Lily, then back to Lily. "He said you're good at Mario Kart, and you have a very detailed argument prepared for why you should get a dog." Lily lowered the menu by about an inch. "It's not an argument, it's a documented case." He mentioned the pros and cons list. "The cons don't hold up under examination." Lily set the menu down. "I crossed them out." "I heard." A pause. "What were the cons?" Lily looked at her with slightly narrowed eyes. Not hostility, but the look of someone assessing whether a question was real or performance. Ava's expression was patient and genuinely curious. Lily apparently arrived at an answer she found acceptable. "One was about the cost," she said, "but I researched it, and if you budget properly, it's actually manageable. The other one was about time for walking, but I calculated that if I walk him before school and Dad walks him in the evenings, it comes out to adequate exercise per day, depending on breed." "What breed are you considering?" "I've narrowed it to 3. Lily held up fingers. "Golden Retriever, which is classic but maybe too common. Bernese Mountain Dog, which is large but research shows they're very calm in apartments if they're exercised enough. Or a rescue of indeterminate breed which has ethical advantages." Mason, who had heard versions of this argument for 3 months, watched Ava receive it with the same serious attention she'd give to an operations briefing. "I had a dog growing up," Ava said. "Beagle mix. His name was Lieutenant." Lily stared at her. "Lieutenant?" "I was 7 and very into military history for about 8 months." "That's an unusual phase," Lily said. "I was an unusual 7-year-old. Something shifted in Lily's face. Small, almost invisible. The first hairline crack in the assessment. "Was he good, Lieutenant?" "He ate one of my father's work shoes, and my father was furious for about a week, and then completely forgave him and started giving him table scraps," Ava said, "which undermined our entire training approach, but Lieutenant was very happy about it." Lily almost smiled. "Dogs do that," she said, as though confirming a known fact. "They do," Ava agreed. Donna came by and took their orders. Lily got the blueberry pancakes with extra butter and a hot chocolate, which was what she always got. Mason got the regular stack and coffee. Ava ordered the same thing as Lily, which Mason noticed and which Lily also noticed, though neither said anything about it. The morning moved in the way good mornings move, unevenly, with gaps and recoveries. Lily went quiet for stretches and then asked specific, unexpected questions, the way she did when she was genuinely engaged with something. She asked Ava what her job was, and then asked follow-up questions when Ava answered that were more sophisticated than most adults' questions would have been. She asked why Ava's company was called Sterling Dynamics, which led Ava to explain that Sterling was her last name and Dynamics was about systems in motion, which led Lily to observe that her teacher, Mrs. Hendricks, had told them that everything was a system if you looked at it right. "Your teacher sounds smart," Ava said. "She is, but she talks too slowly when she reads aloud," Lily said. "It breaks the story into too many pieces." Mason watched Ava's mouth do the thing it did when she was genuinely amused and trying to keep it proportionate. "That's a specific criticism." "Stories should have momentum," Lily said, in the tone of someone who had thought about this. Then, after a pause, "Dad says my mom loved stories." The table went quiet. Not awkwardly. It was the kind of quiet that settles when something important has been put on the table carefully. Mason felt his chest tighten in the particular way it did when Lily brought Sophie up unexpectedly in front of someone new, the reflex of not knowing how the other person would handle it. Ava didn't flinch. She didn't redirect. She said, "He's told me a little about her. She was an architect." "She designed buildings," Lily confirmed. "I have one of her drawings in my room. She drew it by hand, not computer. Dad framed it." A pause. She had a really good handwriting for technical stuff, not regular handwriting, which Dad says was basically unreadable. That tracks for architects, Ava said. Very precise in one direction. Do you draw? Not well. I'm better with numbers. Lily thought about this. I'm okay at both, she said without boasting. But I think I might want to do something with animals. Science-type things. She picked up her hot chocolate. I haven't decided. You have time, Ava said. Dad says the same thing. Lily looked at her steadily over the rim of her mug. He also says I should pick something I'd do even if nobody paid me, and then figure out the money part after. That's good advice. He gives pretty good advice mostly. A beat. Except about the dog. I'm going to stay out of the dog situation, Ava said. That seems like it's between you and your dad. Lily nodded, apparently finding this a reasonable and politically sound position. When the bill came, Ava reached for it. Mason reached at the same moment. Their hands landed near each other on the small plastic tray, and they both stopped, and in the fraction of a second that followed, Lily looked at their hands and then looked at her hot chocolate with a neutral expression that meant she was registering something and choosing not to make it a thing. Mason let Ava take the bill. She paid without discussion. Outside, on the sidewalk, they stood in the February cold, and Lily pulled her hat down and re-zipped her jacket with the focused efficiency of a person who had places to be. Then she looked at Ava. You can come back, she said. It was not an effusive invitation. It was Lily's version of approval, direct, simply stated, without decoration. Ava looked at her and said, Thank you. I'd like that. Lily nodded once. Then she took Mason's hand the way she still sometimes did on the street, unselfconsciously, just reaching up and taking it. The reflex of a child who knew her father was the fixed point of her world. And they started down the sidewalk. After half a block, Lily said, She didn't try too hard. No, Mason agreed. She didn't. Lily seemed to file this away with satisfaction. Spring came slowly. The weeks accumulated. Ava came back to the pancake place, to a Saturday afternoon at the Lincoln Park Zoo, where Lily spent 40 minutes at the big cats exhibit and explained to Ava at length why lions were structurally superior hunters to leopards. And Ava listened with an attention that was not condescending and not performed. To a Sunday in March when she showed up at their apartment with Thai food because Mason had mentioned he was behind on a project deadline and she'd correctly concluded that he hadn't fed himself properly. And she and Lily sat at the kitchen table doing a puzzle while Mason finished his work in the other room. And when he came out at 9:30, the puzzle was half done, and they were arguing peacefully about whether a piece went one way or the other. There were bad moments too. This was not a seamless process, and Mason would not have trusted it if it had been. There was a Sunday in April when Lily had a hard day. The particular kind of hard day that arrived sometimes without warning, tied to nothing specific, just the way grief worked in children, surfacing in weather patterns rather than predictable sequences. She cried at dinner for reasons she couldn't articulate and said she missed her mom in the flat, factual way that was worse than crying would have been. Ava had been there, and Mason had watched her face navigate something complex, the understanding that this was not a moment that required her, that required anything except Mason being Mason. She had gotten up and done the dishes, quietly, without being asked, without making it meaningful in any way that drew attention. She just created space by occupying herself elsewhere, and when things settled and Lily came back to herself and asked if they could watch a movie, Ava came and sat in the armchair and nobody made anything of it. Later, after Lily was in bed, Mason had found her in the kitchen with her hands around a glass of water, looking at nothing. You okay? He asked. She stopped, set the glass down. I want to be useful in those moments. My instinct is to do something. And I know the right thing was to step back, but it was right, he said. It was exactly right. It felt like doing nothing. Doing nothing is sometimes the thing. He looked at her. You did the dishes. She made a small, self-deprecating sound, because I didn't know what else to do. That was enough. He moved to stand beside her at the counter, close enough that their arms were almost touching. You were here. That's enough. She turned to look at him, and in the quiet kitchen at the end of a hard evening, she looked exactly like what she was. Someone trying, imperfectly, without any guarantee of getting it right. He reached over and took her hand. It was the first time he'd done it. Not in a decisive way, not as a statement. He just reached over and held her hand because she looked like someone who needed to be held steady for a moment, and he was someone who wanted to do that. She looked down at their hands, then up at him. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi," he said back. They stood like that in the kitchen for a minute. Outside, the city went about its business. Inside, something that had been building for 5 months settled into itself. Not dramatically, not with any particular ceremony, just quietly, like weather changing, like a door finally allowed to open all the way. "Lily's going to be okay," Ava said. "She's going to be more than okay." He was certain of this. "She has hard days. She'll keep having them. That's not the same thing as not being okay." Ava nodded, held his hand a little tighter. "I keep thinking about what it means," she said slowly. "To be in someone's life, really in it." She paused. "I've been in rooms full of people my whole adult life and mostly alone in all of them. It's different. It's actually different." "Different how?" She looked at their hands. "I think about the two of you when I'm somewhere else. Not as an obligation, not as something I need to manage or perform for. She stopped. "I'm sitting in a meeting in Seattle, and I'm thinking about whether Lily's project went well. I'm on a call with my CFO, and I'm thinking about whether you've eaten something today." She paused. "That has never happened to me before." He looked at her for a long moment. In all the months of careful, measured movement, he had been watching for the moment when he could say what he was actually thinking. He'd been waiting until he was certain, not of perfection, which didn't exist and which he'd stopped requiring from life when Sophie died, but of truth. The particular truth of knowing that someone in front of you is real and present, and in it for the actual reasons. "I love you," he said. Ava went very still. "I'm not saying it to pressure you or create something you're not ready for," he continued, steady, honest. "I'm saying it because it's true, and I think you deserve to hear it." She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were bright and slightly too full, and she made a small sound that was not quite a laugh, but was in that neighborhood. "I love you too," she said. "I have for months. I just didn't know how to say it to someone who actually—" She stopped. "Who actually means it back." He put his arm around her then, in the ordinary kitchen of his ordinary apartment, and she leaned into it like someone who had been holding themselves upright through effort for a very long time. And in the hallway, Lily Carter stood in her socks, with her hair loose from sleep, having gotten up for water, and found something instead. A sight she would not fully understand for years, but would remember with perfect clarity. Her father's arm around someone, someone's head against his shoulder. Both of them quiet in the kitchen, like they'd always been there. Lily stood in the hallway for a long moment. Then she padded back to her room without making a sound. She got into bed and pulled the covers up and lay in the dark with her thoughts, the way she did when she was working something out. She thought about her father's voice over the last few months, the different voice. She thought about Ava listening to the lion explanation at the zoo without once looking at her phone. She thought about the puzzle on the kitchen table and the Thai food, and the way Ava had done the dishes tonight without making a thing of it. She thought about her mother, framed on the bookshelf. She talked to that photo sometimes, not out loud, just in her head, the private kind of conversation. She had one now. She's careful with him, Lily thought toward the photo. And she doesn't pretend. I checked. Outside, the city held its ordinary nighttime sounds. Inside, Lily Carter decided that her world was still intact, changing, really, but intact. Still hers, still safe. She closed her eyes. She slept. Summer arrived the way it always did in Chicago. Not gradually, but all at once, like the city had been holding its breath through April and May, and finally exhaled into something warm and loud and full of itself. The lake turned blue. The parks filled up. Lily finished 3rd grade on a Friday afternoon and came out of school with her backpack half open and her hair in 2 uneven braids that had been even at 7 that morning, holding a report card that she handed to Mason on the sidewalk with the particular composure of someone who already knew what was in it. He read it, looked up at her. "Lily." "I know," she said. "This is Bug. This is a great report card. I know, she said again, but this time she was smiling, the full version, the one she tried to keep contained when she was proud of herself and hadn't finished deciding if she was allowed to show it. He picked her up. She was getting too big for this, and they both knew it, but neither of them had officially acknowledged it yet. And she laughed with the unself-conscious sound of a child who still trusted completely that the person holding her would not drop her. Ava was waiting at the car. She'd driven over from the West Loop office, still in her work clothes, leaning against the hood with her arms crossed against the June warmth. When Lily saw her, she held out the report card without ceremony, the way she'd started doing things with Ava over the past several months. Not making a production of including her, just including her, matter-of-factly, the way you share things with people who are simply part of your life. Ava took the card. Read it. Looked up with an expression that was trying very hard to be proportionate and not quite succeeding. Lily, she said, everyone keeps saying my name like that. Because it's impressive. She handed the card back. You should be proud. I am, Lily said simply. Can we get ice cream? They got ice cream. This was the shape of that summer. Ordinary things made full by the fact that all three of them were doing them together. The ice cream and the Saturday mornings and the Sunday afternoons at the lakefront, where Lily collected rocks by quality criteria she had developed herself and explained to anyone who would listen. There were bad days too, because life had those built in and no arrangement of people could eliminate them. A week in July when Ava's company hit a crisis with a major client account that had her working 18-hour days and mostly unavailable. A night when Mason and Ava had their first real argument, a quiet and unexpectedly pointed disagreement about her tendency to handle problems alone without telling him, to manage difficulty the way she managed everything, by containing it, by not letting it be anyone else's issue. I don't need you to solve it, she said, in the kitchen, her voice controlled in the way it got when she was working very hard to stay controlled. I needed to handle it. I know you didn't need me to solve it, he said. I needed to know it was happening. There's a difference. I've been handling things alone for 8 years. You're not alone now. He said it without raising his voice, without drama, just as a fact. That's the whole point. You're not alone now, and that means I'm supposed to know when something is wrong. Not so I can fix it, so I can be here while you deal with it. She looked at him. The controlled expression cracked slightly. Not broken, just shifted. I don't know how to do that automatically. I know. I'm not angry about it. He moved toward her. I'm telling you because I want it to be different. I want you to be able to call me when it's bad. That's all. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I'll try. That's all I'm asking. It wasn't the last time that particular tension surfaced. Old habits don't restructure themselves over a single conversation, and Ava had 8 years of muscle memory built around self-sufficiency and containment. But she tried. And Mason learned to recognize the specific quality of her voice when something was going wrong that she was trying to carry alone. And he learned to ask the direct question instead of waiting for her to volunteer it. And she learned slowly and imperfectly to let the answer be true. This was what love actually was, Mason thought, watching her work through it. Not the hotel room and the storm, though that had been real. Not the coffee and the careful months of earning something. It was this. The willingness to stay in the room when a pattern of another person's life bumped up against yours and created friction, and instead of walking away from the friction, working it out together. That was the thing you chose over and over in the ordinary Tuesday evenings and the arguments and the moments when someone was tired and impatient and not at their best. You chose them anyway, and that choosing was the actual substance of the thing. He was 33 years old, and he understood this the way he understood most important things. Slowly, and through experience, and with the help of someone who was honest with him. By August, Ava had quietly stopped maintaining the fiction that she had a separate apartment. She'd taken one when the Chicago office opened, a furnished place in River North that she'd described to Mason as fine, functional, lacks personality. But she was sleeping there maybe 2 nights a week, and those nights were the ones that were logistically unavoidable rather than chosen. The rest of the time, she was at the apartment on Lakeview, in Mason's space that had been Lily's space and his space for 4 years, and which had been absorbing her presence so gradually that Mason found it genuinely difficult to identify when it had stopped being strange and started being ordinary. There was a night in late August when he came home late. A board dinner that had run past 10, the first real test of his director role on a high-visibility project, and he was tired in the good way that came from having done something hard and done it well. The apartment was quiet. He found Ava asleep on the couch, a physical book open on her chest the way she always fell asleep. Not face down, the spine carefully not cracked. Even in sleep she was precise about books. Lily's door was closed and there was a light under it, which meant she was awake and reading past the official lights-out boundary, which he decided he would officially not notice tonight. He stood in his own living room for a moment and felt the weight of the apartment, the weight of it being full. Not crowded, not invaded, but inhabited. The way a place feels when the people in it belong there. He took the book from Ava's chest and marked the page and set it on the coffee table and covered her with the blanket from the armchair and turned off the lamp. In the kitchen, there was a note on the counter in Lily's handwriting, which had improved significantly over the year but still tilted aggressively to the right. Dinner is in the fridge. Ava helped. She burned the garlic the first time, but we fixed it. I went to bed. Good luck with the fancy dinner. L. Below that, in a different handwriting, neater, more controlled. A single addition. She's right. I burned the garlic. It was actually fine. A. He stood there holding the note for a moment. Then he put it in the kitchen drawer where he kept things he wanted to keep. He proposed in November. 1 year, almost exactly, from the storm. He had not planned it around the anniversary deliberately, or maybe he had, slightly, in the way that some things are planned below the level of conscious decision by some part of you that is keeping track even when you tell yourself you're not. He'd been thinking about it since August. He'd bought the ring in September from a jeweler on Michigan Avenue that a colleague had recommended, and the ring was simple, nothing performative, nothing that announced itself, just a thing of quality and intention. He'd carried it in his jacket pocket for 6 weeks, which was its own kind of answer to whether he was ready. He'd talked to Lily first. This was important, non-negotiable in his own thinking. Not because he needed her permission, but because she deserved to be part of the conversation rather than an audience to the outcome. He took her to the pancake place on a Saturday morning in late October, the two of them, just them. He ordered the regular stack and she ordered the blueberry, and he waited until they were halfway through before he said, "I need to talk to you about something." She looked up. The assessment. "I'm thinking about asking Ava to marry me," he said. Simply. Directly. The way he'd learned to talk to Lily about hard things, not cushioned, not built up, just said. Lily was quiet for a moment. She turned her fork over once in her hand. "Are you asking me if it's okay? I'm telling you what I'm thinking, and I want to know how you feel about it." She considered this distinction carefully. "That's different." "Yes." "You're going to do it either way." "I'm going to think hard about what you say, and it matters to me. But yes, if everything feels right, I'm going to ask her." He held her eyes. "You're not voting on this, Lily, but you're not invisible in it either. Does that make sense?" She nodded slowly, looked at her pancakes, looked back at him. "She's not going to try to be my mom." "No, she knows that." "She knows what she is," Lily said, phrased like a conclusion she'd already reached on her own and was confirming. "She doesn't pretend to be anything she isn't." "No, she doesn't." Lily was quiet again. Outside the diner, the October wind moved through the trees on Belmont, yellow leaves coming off in clusters. "Mom would want you to be happy," Lily said finally. She said it carefully, the way she said things about Sophie, with the particular gravity of someone who couldn't verify the statement but believed it completely. "I think she would. I've thought about it a lot." Mason's throat tightened. He let it. "Yeah?" "She was nice," Lily said. "Moms who are nice want their husbands to be happy after." She said it with the slightly clinical confidence of an 8-year-old who has done the logic and trusts the result. Then with the abruptness that was pure Lily, "Does Ava know you're asking?" "Not yet." "So I know before she does." For now. Lily appeared to find this genuinely satisfying. She took a long drink of her hot chocolate. Then, "We should get a dog soon, before the wedding. It would be easier to introduce a dog and a marriage at the same time than separately." Mason looked at her. Are you using this as leverage for the dog? I'm noting that the timing works out logistically. Lily? The documented case still stands, Dad. He took a long breath. We'll talk about the dog. That's what you always say. This time I mean it differently. She looked at him with Sophie's eyes, that clear, complete attention. Then she smiled, the full version, and reached across the table and stole one of his pancakes, which was something she only did when she was genuinely happy and felt like she could get away with it. He let her have it. He asked Ava on a Saturday evening in November, 12 days before the one-year mark of the storm. He didn't make a production of it. No restaurant reservation, no elaborate staging, no audience. Those things were not who either of them were. He asked her in the apartment, in the kitchen, at 8:30 at night when Lily was at Rachel's for the weekend. They'd had dinner, pasta, which was still the weeknight standby, and they'd eaten at the counter instead of the table because neither of them had wanted to make the move to a more formal arrangement. And she was washing dishes at the sink while he put the leftover sauce away, and the apartment was doing its ordinary Saturday evening thing. He had the ring in his pocket. He'd had it there all day. He came to stand beside her at the sink. She was washing the pasta pot, which required a specific kind of elbow effort that she'd gotten good at over the months. He waited until she set it in the drying rack and then said, Ava. She heard something in how he said it. She turned around. He had the ring in his hand. He hadn't gotten down on one knee. He thought about it, and it didn't feel like them. It felt like a performance of a thing rather than the thing itself. He just stood in his kitchen, holding a ring and looking at her. I don't have a speech, he said. I've been thinking about one for 2 months, and everything I came up with sounded wrong because it tried to make this bigger than it is, and it doesn't need to be bigger than it is. It's just... He looked at her. You came back. You showed up. You sat across from my daughter, and you didn't try too hard, and you were honest with her the same way you were honest with me, and you burned the garlic and put a note about it, and you fell asleep on my couch and you stayed. He paused. You stayed, Ava. Through the hard parts and the ordinary parts, you stayed. And I don't want to build whatever comes next without you in it. She was looking at him with the undefended expression, the one that he'd first seen in a hotel room a year ago, the one that meant she'd stopped managing the distance and was just present, fully, without the armor. Mason, she said, you don't have to answer right. Yes, she said, simply, clearly, like a door that had already decided to open. Yes, obviously yes. He put the ring on her finger. Her hand was still slightly wet from the dishes, and neither of them mentioned it. She looked at the ring for a moment, and then she looked at him, and what was in her face was not the performance of joy or the camera-ready version of a moment. It was just her, genuinely overwhelmed by something real, blinking too fast. I burned the garlic, she said. I know. That's really what did it for you? That and the note, he said. The note was the thing. She made a sound that was somewhere between laughing and crying, leaned in, and put her forehead against his. They stood in the kitchen in the ordinary evening quiet, the city outside doing its ordinary November things. And it was nothing like a movie, and nothing like a keynote, and nothing like anything that would make a profile in a business magazine. It was just two people in a kitchen who had both spent years moving fast and alone and had finally stopped running in the same direction long enough to find each other. They told Lily the next morning when Mason picked her up from Rachel's. She was in the back seat, and he'd barely pulled away from the curb before he said, I asked Ava last night. Silence from the back. Then, and? She said yes. A longer pause. He checked the mirror. Lily was looking out the window at the November street, processing the way she processed things, privately, with the full apparatus of her thinking. Okay, she said finally. Okay? Okay, I'm glad. She looked at the back of his head. Can I call her? Right now? Yes, right now. He handed his phone back. Lily called Ava, who answered on the third ring, and there was a brief conversation that Mason could only partially hear. Lily's voice in the back seat, then Ava's voice from the phone, then Lily saying something that he couldn't make out, and then a silence, and then Lily saying, quite clearly, I've been working on him about the dog for almost a year. You have a lot of influence now. I just want you to know that I'm available to brief you on the strategic situation whenever you're ready. He heard Ava laugh through the phone, the full, unguarded version. "I'll call you this week," Ava said. "We'll discuss strategy." Lily handed the phone back with the satisfied expression of someone who had just opened a second front in a long campaign. "You know I can hear all of this," Mason said. "That was the point," said Lily. Quote, they got the dog in January. A 3-year-old rescue of indeterminate breed, the ethical choice, as Lily had always argued, named Ptolemy, which was Lily's selection and which she defended by explaining that Ptolemy was a great mathematician and her dog was going to be great too, and the name had to reflect that. Ptolemy turned out to be roughly 40 pounds of brown and white chaos, who chewed one of Ava's work folders in the first week and developed an immediate and inexplicable attachment to sleeping across Mason's feet, which meant Mason spent a significant portion of January shuffling around his own apartment with a dog attached to him. "This is your fault," he told Lily. "Ptolemy loves you," she said. "That's not a fault. He's sitting on my feet right now." "He finds you stabilizing," Lily said. She was doing homework at the kitchen table with Ptolemy's tail occasionally thumping against her chair leg. "I read that dogs seek physical contact with people they trust." "Then why isn't he on your feet?" "He trusts me differently. More as a peer." Ava, from the couch, did not look up from her book. "She has an answer for everything," she told Mason. "She always has," he said. "I'm right here," Lily noted. "We know," they said, at almost the same time. Lily looked between them with the expression of someone witnessing a pattern that was becoming familiar and had opinions about it. "You two are starting to do the same time thing," she observed. "The same time thing?" Mason asked. "Where you say the same thing at the same time. Mrs. Hendricks says that happens when people have been together long enough." A pause. "She said it about couples." A brief quiet in the kitchen. "Your teacher talks about couples a lot," Ava said carefully. "She talks about a lot of things. She's informative." Lily went back to her homework. "I'm just noting it." It was such an ordinary moment. Kitchen, homework, dog on the floor, 2 adults on the periphery of a child's evening. And Mason held it for a second in the way he'd learned to hold ordinary moments since Sophie died, since the lesson that ordinary was not guaranteed and shouldn't be treated as such. He held it the way you hold something you know the value of. They married in October, 14 months after the storm. The ceremony was small. Small in the way that Ava's world considered small, which was still more people than Mason would have chosen left entirely to himself, but they'd negotiated and landed somewhere that felt honest for both of them. A venue in the West Loop, the neighborhood where Ava's Chicago office had taken root, because that felt right. A place that existed because they'd found each other, made into the backdrop for a formal acknowledgement of what they'd built since. Rachel cried during the vows, which she would deny later with the vigor of someone deeply committed to their own composed image. Ava's brother James flew in from Houston and spent most of the cocktail hour playing with his daughter Amara and making eyes at the past appetizers. Ava's father came, a man named Robert Sterling, shorter than Mason had imagined, with his daughter's precise eyes and the careful affect of someone who had made his peace with being proven wrong and was choosing to lead with the being there rather than the history. He shook Mason's hand before the ceremony with a grip that said more than he was going to put into words. "She's different," he said quietly. "With you. Better." "She's the same," Mason said. "She's just not performing anymore." Robert Sterling looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded once. A slow nod, the kind that acknowledged something that had needed to be acknowledged. Ava's mother had died when Ava was 17, a fact Mason had learned gradually, in pieces, the way you learn the real architecture of a person. It was the thing underneath the drive, the shadow that gave the ambition its specific urgency. Her mother had told her once, in what turned out to be the last real conversation they'd had before things deteriorated, that the most important thing a person could do was build something that lasted. She'd meant a career. Ava had taken it as a career. It had taken her until her 30s, until a storm in a hotel room, and a man who didn't want anything from her to understand that her mother had probably meant something else. Lily was the flower girl. Mason had asked her, asked, not told, 2 months before the wedding, sitting on the edge of her bed on a Sunday night. She'd been quiet about it for a moment, and he'd watched her face do the thing it did when she was genuinely working through something. "Is it going to be formal?" she asked. "Semi-formal," he said. "Not stiff. I don't want a poofy dress. You don't have to wear a poofy dress. Can I pick?" "Within reason, yes." She thought about it, then, "Okay." A pause. "Dad? Yeah?" "I'm glad you didn't stop moving," she said. He looked at her. "What do you mean?" She pulled her covers up slightly. "After Mom, some dads stop. I've seen it with kids at school. Their dads just kind of freeze. They stop trying new things or meeting people or—" She searched for the word. "Expanding. You didn't stop." She looked at him with Sophie's direct, clear eyes. "I don't want you to be just my dad. I want you to be a whole person who has a life and is also my dad." He sat on the edge of her bed for a moment with that settling into him. "When did you figure that out?" he asked. "I've been thinking about it for a while," she said. "Ava helped. She told me once that the bravest thing is letting people in when you have good reasons not to." A pause. "She said she learned it from you." He reached over and tucked her hair back the way he'd done since she was small. "You're going to be a remarkable person, Lily Carter." "I know," she said. "You tell me that a lot." A beat. "I don't mind." At the wedding, she walked down the aisle ahead of them in a navy dress she'd chosen herself. Simple, no poof, with small embroidered stars on the sleeves that she'd asked the seamstress to add. A detail that echoed her favorite sweatshirt and that nobody except Mason fully understood the significance of. She held a small basket of white and yellow flowers, and she walked with the focused composure of someone who understood that the occasion was important and intended to honor it. When she reached the front and turned around and saw Mason standing at the other end of the aisle, about to walk toward where Ava would come from, she gave him a small nod. The kind that said, "I'm here. It's okay. Go." He nodded back. Ava walked without being given away. She'd been specific about this, in the conversations that preceded everything. Not because she didn't value the tradition, but because she'd built her own life and she was coming to this of her own motion, under her own agency, and that was the truth of it, and she wanted it visible. She walked alone, and she walked toward Mason, and when she reached him, she looked at him with the undefended expression, the real one, the hotel room one, the one he'd been carrying since a November storm a year and 2 months ago. The ceremony was not long. They had both agreed they didn't need a lot of words on top of everything that had already been said. The officiant was brief and warm and got out of the way of the moment rather than filling it with borrowed language. When Mason said, "I do," his voice was steady in the way it was steady when he was certain. Not performed certainty, just the real version. When Ava said it, her voice caught slightly on the first word and didn't catch on the second, and Mason thought that was exactly right. Lily, standing to the side, held her basket and watched with the expression of someone who was feeling several things simultaneously and was old enough to know that was okay. The year that followed was not perfect. It was something better than perfect. It was actual. There were the adjustments that came with building a household out of 3 people who each had their own established patterns. There was the night Ava came home at midnight 3 times in 1 week, and Mason said, quietly but directly, that they needed to renegotiate something about her hours because Lily was noticing, and Ava, not without some initial defensiveness, and not in a single conversation, worked through it and made the changes, and meant them. There were the arguments that came from 2 strong-willed adults sharing a life that neither of them had shared with anyone in a long time. The friction of habits, meeting habits. There was also the morning Ptolemy ate Ava's passport and the resulting scramble to the Chicago Passport Agency in a situation that produced a level of coordinated panic that Mason would describe later as the most genuinely team-building event of their first year of marriage. There was the spring when Lily started middle school and hated it for the first 2 months with a specific, focused misery that required Mason and Ava to have separate and then joint conversations about it, to apply different approaches and compare notes and find the right combination, the way parents do when they're actually working as parents, messily, with disagreement towards something they both wanted for the same kid. The kid got through it, By November, she'd found her people, which turned out to be three other children who were also interested in animals and slightly contemptuous of the middle school social hierarchy, and who spent their lunch periods in the science teacher's classroom debating things that the science teacher found delightful and had begun actively facilitating. Ava attended the school science fair. She stood in front of Lily's project, a detailed analysis of urban bird populations in Chicago's lakefront parks, and asked questions for 20 minutes while Lily answered them with the precision of someone who had been preparing for serious inquiry. Another parent standing nearby, who had recognized Ava and was working hard not to be obvious about it, leaned over to Mason and said quietly, "She's really into it." "She is," Mason said. "Is she a scientist?" "No," he said. "She just takes Lily seriously." The parent looked at him, then at Ava, still engaged, asking a follow-up about sampling methodology while Lily corrected a minor error in Ava's interpretation of the data without hesitation. Then back at Mason. "That's the thing," the parent said, with the slightly wondering tone of someone arriving at a conclusion. "Isn't it?" "That's the thing," Mason agreed. Yum. 1 year after the wedding, Mason came home on a Tuesday evening to find Lily and Ava at the kitchen table. This was not unusual. What was unusual was the architectural drawing spread between them. A proper one, drafted on good paper with real tools, the careful measured lines of something technical and precise. He stopped in the doorway. "What is that?" he asked. Lily looked up. Ava found one of Mom's drawings in a portfolio at the storage unit. The one from the Riverside project, the commercial building she designed before I was born. She looked back at it with the focused attention of someone who had been studying it for a while. Ava asked the architecture school at UIC to help us understand the technical parts. He set his bag down slowly. Ava looked at him from the table. Her expression was careful, watchful. She was reading him, the way she'd gotten good at reading him over 2.5 years. "Is this okay?" she asked quietly. "I should have asked first. I just thought it's okay," he said. His voice was slightly thick in a way he didn't try to hide. "The building was built," Lily said, still studying the drawing. "I looked it up. It still exists. It's in Riverside, like it says. It's a small office building now, but the original design is still there mostly." She traced a line on the drawing carefully, not quite touching the paper. "She designed something that's still standing." Mason came to the table, sat down, looked at the drawing, Sophie's handwriting in the title block, the precise technical notation of her. The handwriting that Lily was right was barely legible in the margins where she'd made notes to herself. He looked at it for a long time. "She would have liked you," he said to Ava. Ava looked at him. "She had a very good instinct about people," he said, "and she respected competence. She would have found you genuinely interesting." He paused. "And she would have liked that you take Lily seriously." Ava's jaw tightened slightly, not an emotion she was suppressing, but an emotion she was letting stay. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Lily, who had been listening, reached over and put her hand flat on the drawing, not over Sophie's handwriting, beside it, alongside it. "I'm going to go see the building," she said. "When I'm old enough to go on my own, I'm going to go look at it." "I'll take you," Mason said. "I want to go alone," she said. "The first time." She paused. "But maybe you can come after." "Okay." "Both of you," she added, without looking up from the drawing. "Both of them," she had said. "Not just him. Both." There is a thing that people say about second chances, about love that arrives after loss. They say it as though it erases what came before, as though choosing the future means surrendering the past. This is not how it works. It has never been how it works. What Mason Carter had learned in the 4 years between losing Sophie and finding himself in a hotel room with a stranger during a storm was that grief is not a problem to be solved, but a fact to be integrated. Sophie was not a chapter that closed. She was in the apartment, and in the framed drawing, and in the specific way Lily tilted her head when she was thinking hard. She was in Mason's understanding of what it meant to love someone while you had them and to carry them when you didn't. What Ava had brought was not a replacement, and never tried to be one. She brought something different, the addition of herself, with all the complication and history and imperfect effort that entailed. What Lily had needed was not a new mother, which nobody could provide. What she had found over 2 years of pancakes and zoo trips and homework at the kitchen table and hard evenings and ordinary evenings and the dog sleeping across everyone's feet was a woman who took her seriously, who showed up, who burned the garlic and wrote a note about it and didn't try to be anything other than what she was. And this was the thing that the storm had made possible. Not a clean slate, not a fairy tale, just 3 real people, imperfect and trying, building something that held. Ava Sterling, who had spent the better part of a decade proving something to a world that had underestimated her, had finally stopped asking the world to confirm what she was worth and started asking a different question. She had found her answer not in any deal she'd closed or profile that had run or valuation milestone the company had hit. She found it on a Saturday morning in a diner on Belmont when a 9-year-old girl with her mother's eyes said, "You can come back," in the flat, unadorned tone of someone who meant it. She was 32 years old, and she was not finished with the work, not retired from ambition, not transformed into a different person. She was the same person. She just knew now what she was working for. She had something waiting at home when the work was over. Mason Carter had stopped telling himself the story that moving forward was the same as moving on. He had learned, slowly, imperfectly, through the medium of an 8-year-old's long-game dog campaign and late-night kitchen conversations, and a woman who left notes about burned garlic, that honoring the past and choosing the future were not in opposition. They were the same motion. They were, in fact, the only way through. And Lily Carter, who had grown up knowing loss before she had the language for it, who had cataloged 14 pros in a notebook and crossed out both cons, who had assessed a stranger in a booth and arrived at her own verdict on her own timeline, and not a moment before, Lily Carter had added one person to her fixed points. She still had her father, permanent and present. She still had her mother, framed on the bookshelf and in the architectural drawing and in the specific angle of her own thinking. And she had Ava, not as a replacement for anything, just as herself, just as the person who showed up and stayed and never tried too hard and always told the truth. On a Tuesday evening in November, 2 years after a storm had grounded every flight out of Chicago, Lily Carter was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. Ptolemy was on Mason's feet. Ava was cooking, attempting more accurately, something with chicken that she'd been assured by an online recipe was straightforward and which had already generated 3 text messages to Mason from the kitchen asking questions he was answering from the living room. The apartment smelled like garlic, this time not burned. "Dad?" Lily called from the kitchen. "Yeah?" "Ava says she needs a second opinion on the chicken." "I'm almost certain it's fine," Ava said from somewhere near the stove. "She doesn't trust herself." "I trust myself with most things. Chicken is a specific vulnerability." Mason extracted his feet from under Ptolemy, who made a sound of deep personal offense, and went to the kitchen. He stood behind Ava and looked at the pan. He tasted a small piece of chicken and considered it with the seriousness the situation required. "It's good," he said. "Really?" "It's actually good." She turned around with the expression of someone who has achieved something they were not fully confident in and is not going to pretend otherwise. "I want that noted." "Noted," he said. He kissed her temple, quick and ordinary. "The chicken is good." Lily, who had been watching all of this from the kitchen table with Ptolemy now relocated to her feet, picked up her pencil and went back to her homework with the satisfied expression of someone whose world was, on balance, running correctly. Outside, November moved through Chicago. The lake was going gray. The trees were done with their leaves. Somewhere in the city, flights were taking off and landing, people were arriving and departing, storms were building over the plains that hadn't reached anyone yet. Inside, dinner was almost ready. And the 3 of them, imperfect and real, choosing each other in the ordinary evening the same way they'd been choosing each other for 2 years, were exactly where they were supposed to be.